That should come online any minute. Hello everyone, and welcome to this Global Fleet Champions webinar on sustainability and fleets. If you're new to our webinars, Global Fleet Champions is a partnership campaign administered by Brake, the road safety charity, to prevent deaths, injuries and pollution caused by vehicles driven for work. To learn more about the work that we do and to access fleet safety resources and more events, please visit globalfleetchampions.org. And if you're not already a member, you can sign up for free on the website. Brake is a road safety charity working to prevent road deaths and injuries, make communities safer and support people bereaved and injured in crashes through a range of initiatives, and one of those initiatives being Global Fleet Champions. So on to our first speaker for today. We've got three fantastic speakers lined up, and I'm delighted firstly to introduce Kirsten Corson. Kirsten is co-founder and director of Zilch, which is an EV mobility as a service business, along with carbon asset management, which supports businesses to decarbonise their fleet, and Sustainable Fleet Finance, which is a green fleet finance company. And Kirsten also sits on the Drive Electric board. So it's fantastic to have you along today, Kirsten. Thanks very much for that. So I'm going to just stop sharing now and hand over to you.
Fantastic. Tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thanks so much for that wonderful intro. And I'll just share my screen and we'll start from the beginning. So I'm hoping everyone can see it. So keen to just talk about EVs in particular today. But as Caroline said, I think you can probably just define me as a bit of a sustainable mobility geek. And that covers, I guess for us, sustainable mobility is three things at Zilch. We talk about financial, environmental and social. And I'm keen just to dig into a few of the challenges we've got in this country to tackle and really achieve sustainable mobility as a country. You know, first of all, the financial cost to our country. We've got the 5th highest car ownership rate in the OECD. That really comes from that, you know, quarter acre section mentality. We do like to own our assets. If you think about it, we've got over $30 billion invested in our vehicle fleet, and it's the second biggest investment we make after our house. And you know, fortunately, our houses make money, but, you know, our vehicle fleet is a depreciating asset. So I guess one of the big challenges is how do we reduce that investment in a depreciating asset, and how could we get greater utilisation from our assets when you think our cars are used less than 5% of the time. You know, to hit our Paris Agreement targets, when you think of a third of our trips are 2 kilometres or less, that's quite embarrassing really compared to Europe or North America. So that's over 1.5 billion trips we have in our cars that we could have used active transport. We could have, you know, got on a scooter or a bike or even walked. So that's a huge opportunity for this country. If we look at the environmental cost, unfortunately, our emissions, our vehicles have actually grown. Unfortunately, it's 20% of our carbon footprint for the country, but for most businesses we talk to, it's about 40% of their footprint for their business as well. And when you compare transport to the likes of the farming sector, it's our easiest emission to actually tackle. So when I say easy, we all know if you're involved with a fleet, it's actually quite challenging. And that whole change management piece is critical to get it right. And, you know, we can see the effects just in the last month, both in North America and climate change and what's happening with flooding in New Zealand recently as well. We're seeing the impacts, and it's unfortunately just the beginning. If we look at the social piece to sustainability, and this is a I guess an area New Zealand's got an opportunity to think a little bit harder about. We've got the 6th highest crash rate in the OECD, and we've got, an older car fleet than the likes of Cuba and Lithuania. So we keep our cars on the road for 2 decades, and the average age of a car in New Zealand is 14 years. So we've got a really old fleet. And when you've got old fleets like that with low ANCAP ratings, the propensity, the higher risk of accidents and fatalities is just so much higher. So there is a huge opportunity there. We've also got, the average car is pumping out 4.6 tonnes. That's actually a global figure a year. And, in the last 2 months, there's been some really interesting studies come out around the cost of our emissions footprint. And if you look at just at transport, in New Zealand, that's causing 2,247 premature deaths each year, and that's costing, $10.5 billion, and it's causing over 10,000 hospital admissions and over 13,000 kids to get asthma. So that's quite startling. That was way worse than we had realised. The last study that had been undertaken in 2012, it was about 950. So that's a lot higher and a lot worse than we thought. I'm a bit of a Rod Carr fan, so I thought I'd throw in a couple of quotes from Rod Carr, just saying, if we look at that financial sustainability piece, if we just remove our cars off the road and replace them with EVs, it's going to cost the country an additional $100 billion over the next 25 years. So we've got a great opportunity to look at our mobility and, as I've said already, how could we mode shift? Obviously, how can we electrify our public transport, change the designs of our cities to make it easier? And technology has a big part to play too, to make lots of different modes of mobility accessible and affordable. And because the reality is, if we look at mobility at the moment, we've got less than 2% of our fleet are electric or zero emission, whether it's hydrogen or electric. It's less than 2%. And we've got targets, the government has given us targets of 30% of the fleet to go zero emission by 2035. So at the moment, our mobility jigsaw puzzle is very much red, and from now until 2035, we've got to change that to bringing more green in there. So let's just have a little chat about EVs. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that they're not the be-all and the end-all for a fleet. They may be if you don't have any fit-for-purpose requirements, but certainly we don't have a corporate option of four-wheel drive at the moment. We don't have an EV ute, which I know is a big barrier for a lot of Kiwis. And when you look at the footprint of an EV, it's got a higher carbon footprint manufacture compared to an ICE vehicle. And when I say ICE, I'm meaning internal combustion engine. It's also a lot more expensive. So you've got a higher capital cost and you've got a higher carbon footprint. So it's really important that those assets are well utilised. So we can't, as Rod Carr says, just take our ICE off the road and replace them with EVs. We've got to find some smarter ways of approaching our mobility. We've also got a lot of minerals that are required in the high density battery, and whilst technology is advancing and we're seeing the beginnings of solid state batteries and cobalt free batteries coming in by a lot of manufacturers, we're on that technology breakthrough, but at the moment we need to utilize those assets well so we have less of them. Charging infrastructure is also a really big challenge for a lot of people, and I can say that certainly the government and certainly Drive Electric have identified that we need to do a lot more work around charging infrastructure. And also just from a just transitions lens, there's a lot of work we're going to need to do to make EVs and charging accessible and affordable for Kiwis, for all the reasons that I've just mentioned already. I just thought it was important just to give you a little bit of an overview of charging infrastructure. So, because there's a lot of challenge around that. Public chargers, they're mostly DC. If you're looking at wanting to know a little bit more about charging infrastructure, I'd encourage you to download the PlugShare app or the ChargeNet app to see what chargers are around in your community. Public chargers are mainly used for when you're traveling out of your region, out of your city or town. The most common chargers are the work chargers, and in time it will be home chargers. They're obviously, as you can see, a lot more cost effective, but they're obviously a lot slower as well. So that's just something to for you to get your head around, and I've said to Caroline, more than happy to share my slides. As I've said already, we've got to look at how we can make our assets more productive, so we need less of them. And it doesn't matter whether it's a petrol car, a charger, a hybrid car, a hydrogen car, or an EV. We've got to increase the utilisation of our assets, and that's will have a major financial, impact. Instead of having $30 billion invested in our vehicle fleet, how could we get that down to, say, 15 billion and be using our capital more wisely in a small country like New Zealand? I thought it was good to give an example of the Zilch model. So you think about the sharing economy and how that could play a part in your mobility. And Genesis Energy's one of our customers. They're also our electricity partner, and this is I think a neat story. When 2 years ago they had over 240 car parks included in salary packages, and they looked to a 2-year journey on how they could support their staff to transition. So over that 2 years, they've removed all cars and car parks from salary packages. They've installed charging infrastructure in their offices. They've reduced their fleet size by 30%. And they've also opened via the Zilch Mobility as a Service platform. They've opened their cars up for business bookings and private bookings. So there's no FBT for them to pay, and they've also earning money off their company cars. And Zilch supports them with all of the comms and a 24/7 support service as well. So it's that real integrated, how can we reduce our scope 3 emissions? How can we offer mobility to our staff after hours? Some of the other neat things they've done, which is they were the first corporate in Auckland to offer a subsidy on public transport, and it's a really sizable one too. And they also offered discounts on e-bikes as well. So I'll start closing this to an end with another Rod Carr quote, which really just covers off some of the points that I've spoken about, about how we think about transport as a service, public transport, active mobility, and the urban environment is critical to whether we use our capital wisely or with high regret. So I guess, the big thing is we have this opportunity to change, and it's important, all of you are involved with businesses, to recognise that, businesses buy 70% of New Zealand's new cars. So you've got a really important part to play, because those cars are going to spend the next 2 decades on our road. So whether you're, looking at how could you go from a petrol car or diesel to a hybrid, maybe the most logical place for you to go, or whether you can go EV, or whether you could rationalise your fleet and adopt some micro-mobility for your business. I think it will require change. I'm not going to say it's easy, but that's what we're going to need to do to decarbonise and to get better outcomes for our communities as well. So thank you very much. I've tried to get through it as fast as I possibly can, because once I start talking, I'm quite hard to shut up. So I'll look forward to answering a few questions in question time, and thanks for coming along today.
That's great. Thanks very much, Kirsten. Appreciate you going through all that, and lots of great information there in terms of both data and your experiences as well, and company examples too. So appreciate you being part of today. Thanks very much. If you've got any questions, as Kirsten was saying, then please do send those through via the chat or via the Q&A tab, and we'll keep those until the panel discussion at the end and put them to the speakers. So moving on to our next presenter, we've got Louise Aitken. Louise is the Executive Partner for Circular and Climate Innovation and Sustainability for Toyota New Zealand. She is supporting, enabling and accelerating Toyota's contribution to a low emission society, focusing on product stewardship, innovation and building a foundation of sustainable practice based in science. Louise joined Toyota following 4 years as the Chief Executive Officer of the Aitken Foundation, and she has a wealth of knowledge, influence, and is a highly regarded leader and innovator in the areas of social and environmental impact. So it's brilliant to have you along today as well, Louise. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Carolyn. Tēnā koutou katoa, ko Louise takoingoa no pōnihi aho. It's always great following Kirsten, because I can literally be quiet and maybe just add 5 minutes, because she's just said everything that is all in my notes, which is amazing because she's such an inspiration. So yeah, I've recently joined Toyota. I'm not, as Carolyn said, I'm not from the car industry, so it's been a yeah, quite a journey over the last few months, and pretty exciting as Toyota starts to understand their role in not only a zero emission transport system, but as Kirsten talked about, the transition towards mobility and how we interact with our movement, and we have the freedom to be able to move in the right way for that right moment right across Aotearoa and globally. So I just thought I'd cover a few things. I'll just check, Carolyn, you can see my slides?
So we can, but it's in the normal PowerPoint view at the moment, not slideshow.
Cool.
So if you want
excellent. Let me. There we go. Did that work now?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks.
Yeah, so you know, just following on and reinforcing what Kirsten has said, is that obviously many large organisations, including probably many on this call, have committed towards not only Paris but also the contribution required to get to the global goals for the SDGs as we have here, and Toyota globally is no different to that. Obviously, the largest car manufacturer in the world. 25% of the New Zealand fleet, we have a significant responsibility that leadership role has entitled us to have, and therefore what's our commitment both environmentally, socially and financially to the world we want to live in. So Toyota globally has these 6 challenges, and what we've been able to do here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, is really understand, well, what does that mean for us? What does it mean in the context in which we operate? Obviously, not only the government regulation space, but also what do our people expect? Toyota is the 4th most trusted brand, and as you can imagine, with 25% of our of the New Zealand fleet being Toyotas, we really need to think differently about how we not only support our current customers. What do our future customers need, but what's our responsibility for the product that we've manufactured and brought into this country? So that's big challenges for an organisation like Toyota, and I'm really excited to be on this journey with them. And in less than 2 months, and I actually had a bit of a moment this morning presenting. I'm part of the executive and presenting to my fellow executive members Toyota's science-based targets. So we will be one of the first suite of New Zealand companies adopting science-based targets. We'll be the first car manufacturer to do that. And what that means is not only are we committing to net zero carbon by 2050 or sooner, but we're also committing to a 46% reduction by 2030. And what that means for a car company is pretty extraordinary. Not so much for scope 1 and 2, but really importantly for scope 3. 96% of Toyota's emissions are the cars that we sell. So that's a really big challenge, but also really hugely supported by the position the New Zealand government has taken over the last couple of years, particularly with the Clean Car Standards and the drive, which is the most aggressive in the world, to reduce emissions at the tailpipe. So that's exciting for us, but also what it means is we have to look internally at our own fleet. We need to think about innovation, and we need to think about how do we convince the powers that be that manufacture the cars that we bring into New Zealand to send them our way versus other places. So what's really key to all of this is the innovation. Kirsten really spoke about this really well, which I'll get into how Toyota is contributing to this, is really around mobility. The way that we interact with cars in the future will be very, very different from what we've done in the past. I have a 10-year-old, and I have spoken to him about the fact he'll probably never own a car. He will interact with transport and transport solutions very, very differently than we have. And what this means is we need to think about not only how we bring in the technology and the access to the right forms of transport, but really importantly, how we drive behaviour change. How do we take people on the journey? Because it is difficult, it is something new. And the opportunity we have, not only as Toyota, but I think everyone on this call, is how do we make it as simple as possible for people to see the future today and understand that it's exciting and it should be hopeful rather than something challenging or frightening that maybe people think, are starting to think about, particularly with that asset piece, as Kirsten said, and as inequality continues to increase in our communities. What responsibility do we have in order to address accessibility and affordability through the likes of mobility? We also, and Kirsten has spoken about that, this is that, new technology is certainly a really important part of this. Toyota, despite what people have been saying for years, Toyota is fully behind EV. We've got 16 new EV models coming into New Zealand over the next 5 years, billions of dollars of investment, not only in converting from hybrid through to full electric, but also in the new technology around batteries. And there is a massive amount of investment going in globally by Toyota around solid state and what comes after solid state batteries. So this is really exciting. But as Kirsten mentioned, it comes at a cost, a massive cost. At the moment, there's, I think the number is, there's a demand for about 10 million EV cars globally, and there's only about 2 million made. So what that means is not only does it drive up the price, but it also means you have to wait a long time, as I'm sure anyone on this call with fleets and with a decarbonisation goal is already understanding. What we've also started to do, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, is around access to other innovation types that will be an and when it comes alongside electrification. In Toyota's position, hydrogen is a really, really, really important powertrain. We need to demonstrate it as technology that is accessible and has wide-ranging application alongside electrification. And the other part that I'll quickly cover on is product stewardship. We must be responsible for what we've manufactured and ensure that we're applying a circular economy to those products. So not only is it really vital that we recycle responsibly, but we should be giving a second, a third, a fourth life to those products before they even need to get to recycling. And that's hard to do. It takes a bit of courage and a bit of boldness, but it is something that we're very, very focused on here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, to adopt and demonstrate to the rest of the world that it is possible. So let's quickly talk about car sharing, and obviously in line with the amazing work that Zilch has done, and I've been a Zilch customer for the last few years, this is really important, not only from being able to show corporates and private citizens that mobility through car sharing is an option today, but it's also a great opportunity to be able to work with large corporates, particularly on how can they not only decrease the size of their fleets, but really importantly, how can we introduce new technology for them? In May this year, Toyota launched the hydrogen project, and what this is and this is a picture of a hydrogen car. It's called a Mirai, and basically these are 8 cars in Auckland. We have 8, well there will be 8, there's 4 on the road at the moment. There is 8 large corporates in Auckland who have access to a car sharing fleet where they're able to book these cars and use them as they need around Auckland. The reason why it's in Auckland at the moment, because that's the only place we can refuel them, but it really is not only an opportunity to demonstrate that the thing inside the car, the hydrogen fuel cell, is something that's available now for new applications in hard to decarbonise areas, but really importantly, it's demonstrating to these large corporates that actually car sharing is the way to go. They get better access to and better utilised fleets. They're able to drive these cars around and park them in places that where they go to meetings, and then somebody else can come and pick them up. We're really seeing some great adoption by some of our partners in this program, and it's really exciting to think that they're kind of testing out and being able to demonstrate to their own organisation the importance of fleet utilisation, but also getting a bit of a taste of new technology. The point to make in relation to hydrogen in the light fleet is this is not the solution. We do not believe that hydrogen cars are going to be available and being used by the private car owners. We just don't have the infrastructure in New Zealand, and nor do we want to invest in it in order to make that a reality at scale. So we really see these Mirais as a demonstration of the power of the fuel cell. And we've done a lot of work, obviously, to develop this technology, but we really think it's got massive application in really hard to decarbonise sectors of our economy. Actually, I'll go to this slide first and I'll come back to the next one. Here's one of them. The fuel cell that's in Chase Zero, which is this boat here, is the same fuel cell that's in the Mirai. What we've been able to do with the amazing partnership and innovation expertise at Emirates Team New Zealand is from an idea being a piece of paper, within 9 months, this boat was on the water in Auckland. It has the ability to be out on the water for about 7 to 8 hours, powering over 100 kilometres an hour through Auckland Harbour. If Team New Zealand wanted to electrify a chase boat, the scope of the battery would probably give them about half an hour out on the water, and they'd have to return to base. So it just isn't practical for them to think of electrification being the solution for what they need. So we worked with them and got a fuel cell inside this pretty cool looking boat. And we're now, and pretty excitingly, looking at the hydrogen chase boats being a requirement for all of the challenges and participants in the Barcelona 2024 America's Cup. And so innovation here in New Zealand, our Japanese parent was pretty excited to be able to see this innovation come to life, because it is something groundbreaking. And we know the marine industry is a big, big challenge to decarbonise, as you can imagine. So while emissions is a really important focus for us at Toyota, and how we contribute to the decarbonisation required to get to net zero carbon by 2050 in Aotearoa, New Zealand, we also recognise that financial inclusion and delivering social impact is as important. So what we were able to do last year is work with key partners, the Arkina Foundation and MUMA, to develop a car sharing solution for low-income families. And to Kirsten's point before, really importantly, we knew that EV was not going to be the first option. The cost of EVs and the ability to secure those cars just really made it impractical for us to be able to launch a program that was sustainable and had the financial returns that were required for those people to participate. So what we did is we focused on lower emission vehicles, and we bought these hybrid Corollas into New Zealand. And those are being used by families in South Auckland at the moment. And we're really excited that the program has been given a $20 million investment by government to scale, whereby not only are we bringing low emission solutions to families, but really importantly, enabling them to not only reduce their petrol costs, but also really reduce bill shock. Transport is the fourth biggest reason why people stay in the poverty cycle. And these cars, not only are they low emission, but they come with everything. That's tyres, that's WAF, that's insurance, that's servicing. So if anything goes wrong with them, our local Toyota service centre just drives another car out for them, takes their one away, fixes it, does everything as required and brings it back. So that family doesn't have to worry about where they're going to get transport to get to work that day or take the kids to school. It's a really important way to be able to help people be included in our economy, as well as just transition into the low emission transport system that we need. So just the last thing I'll talk about is Toyota's own fleet. As you can imagine, most of the people who work here love driving pretty big cars and have access to some pretty extraordinary vehicles that Toyota has developed. But many of them are the higher emission ones. And what that's meant for us as an organisation as we go through the process of putting in science-based targets is having to be really honest about what our own fleet emissions are, which is in scope 1 and 2 about 60% of our emissions. And what we have to do is work with our teams to be able to say, well, how do we transition that fleet? It's not only about giving them a lower emission vehicle, but really importantly, how do we utilise the assets that we have from a mobility standpoint? So we're about to test out with our own teams and also a trial down in Nelson, a mobility service so that our teams and hopefully the public in the future will be able to use whatever car they need from the fleet and have it accessible at any time. So this is great technology that, of course, Kirsten and the Zilch team are using, but also we're starting to see globally become really accessible in new cars and the way that they are manufactured, whereby anybody could go up. If you have the right card, you can unlock that car and you can use that car for whatever time period you've booked it for. We want to test that out with our own people, so that we might be able to put a whole bunch of cars that are more applicable for short-term use, whether it's by, taking a trailer to the tip or towing a caravan, whatever it might be. We have those cars available to them, but they use a low emission or a zero emission vehicle for their day-to-day transport. So that's exciting for us. It's something new, but if we do it right, we will be able to reduce our emissions as an organisation, as well as our contribution to the wider New Zealand emission profile. The last quick thing I'll talk about is our commitment to the circular economy. We're starting off with batteries, so you can imagine there's lots of Priuses around. They've been in New Zealand for about 20 years. We have what's called an avalanche of batteries, of nickel metal hydride batteries that are coming out of those cars at the end of life. And we have to take a responsibility to not only shred them and dismantle them and recycle them correctly and recover those precious metals, but really importantly, how do we give them another life? So we're looking at a repair solution where we can take apart that battery in its car, replace maybe a cell or two that isn't performing well, and get that car back on the road. We are looking at replace solutions whereby we can do a long-term repair and rebuild of those batteries much more before it does get into the recycling process. So that's one opportunity for us. We're also looking at plastic, so you can imagine how many bumpers are needing to be recycled in Aotearoa, New Zealand through collisions and end of life. We're also looking at obviously supporting the government's product stewardship program around tyres, windscreens, and interestingly starting to think about decarbonisation of the steel industry, whereby could we do something that can take that steel that's generally shipped overseas and actually return it back into the New Zealand domestic steel manufacturing process. So lots of opportunities. We're pretty excited by them, but we also recognise we can't do this alone. This is not something that Toyota on their own can do. We require partners, we require ideas from other organisations, and we require the ability to share both our failures and our successes and continue to try better. So be ready for us to talk a little bit more openly in November when we launch our our science-based targets, and we really look forward to hearing on how we can support you in your decarbonisation journey if you are a fleet owner, but also If you are an individual customer of Toyota's or plan to be in the future, we hope that you'll be able to see that we're on a really strong sustainability journey. So, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thanks, Louise. Some really interesting information in there too. So thanks very much for that. Really appreciate your time today. And I can also see that we've had a couple of questions come through that are ready for the Q&A session at the end. For those who joined a little bit later in the session, just let you know, we will be having a panel discussion with all of the speakers at the end of all the presentations today. So please feel free to put your questions through via chat or the Q&A button, and we will discuss those all at the end. But next, moving on to our final speaker today, it's Anne-Marie Head. Anne-Marie is an Associate Director and Transportation Engineer at Abley, a specialist NZ-owned transport and location technology consultancy with 80+ employees located throughout Aotearoa. She's a passionate advocate for active travel, and Anne-Marie's led Abley's award-winning travel planning programme designed to encourage and support employees to commute using more sustainable travel options. So it's great to have you here today, Anne-Marie, as well, and sharing some of the experiences that Abley have had. So over to you.
Kia ora koutou. Thank you, Caroline, and thanks for having me today. We'll just see if we can see that.
Yeah, that's all working fine.
Oh. Thanks. All right, so I'll launch into it. So yeah, as Caroline said, we're a professional services company. We have more than 80 staff in 3 offices around Aotearoa, plus some remote workers as well. We work in 5 areas as shown here. I'm a transport engineer, but I also work in the climate and sustainability space and also in road safety. We also are big on data. We're data people, and I'll show you some of that data in a minute. Our purpose is to inspire positive change, and by that we mean providing advice that helps save lives, create safer communities, and make our communities more accessible. And in this topic area, we're very fortunate because we work in the transport sector. We're the people that are helping councils and waka kotahi to redesign our cities. And we also have staff, so we have done a lot of trialing and testing of our own travel initiatives to see what works, and I'll go through some of that in a minute. So today I'm just going to cover off company travel, which has been talked about quite a lot already today. So I won't. I'll just touch on a few things, and then I'm going to look a bit further into employee commuting and how you can help your staff travel more sustainably. So there's some topics there that I'm going to talk through in more detail. So with company travel, we're a carbon reduce certified through Toitu, and as part of that, it's really meant that we've had to measure our carbon footprint as a company. I think everyone will be finding it's becoming more and more important, and it's often a prerequisite to working for some clients as well. So we have developed a Power BI dashboard, which is accessible to everyone in the company, and that tracks our emissions. And because we're an office-based organisation, our largest emissions are in fact air travel. In that blue line you can see there. We found this is a very transparent way of tracking our emissions to work towards our goals that we have under the Carbon Reduce program. In terms of fleet optimization, you need some good metrics to start with. So you need to understand what mileage each vehicle is doing, what operating conditions they're on. Are you driving in urban or rural situations? And then think about what is the best mode for travel. So a few years ago, when we moved to a new office here in central Christchurch, we had a bit of a think about whether we needed 2 pool cars at the time. And we had a look to see what those cars are being used for, and we realized that actually a lot of those trips could be done by bike. So we introduced pool bikes, and we've got our current pool car is a hybrid with very low mileage. For larger companies with bigger fleets, then you know, it's really important to do a fuel management review. One company we've worked with had a 12% saving just by doing that review, worth over $450,000. And you can focus on small things. So it's very nice to have the big picture and where you want to get to, but sometimes that gets a little bit overwhelming. So focusing on small incremental benefits can be helpful. So things like making sure your tyres are correctly inflated, and giving your employees safe driving lessons, because that's fuel efficient driving. Moving on to employee commuting. So we've done a lot of work in this space, firstly on ourselves. So we had a few drivers for encouraging and supporting our staff to commute more sustainably. Clearly there's the environmental one. And I think, as Kirsten mentioned, transport generates about 1/5 of carbon emissions, and it's still growing. And it's also one that we have control over. The second important reason for us was the health and well-being of our staff. So nearly half of adults are not getting the recommended level of physical activity each week in New Zealand, which is only 2.5 hours each week. That's half an hour a day, half an hour for 5 days. Physically active people are at lower risk of developing lots of diseases, heart disease, lung conditions, stroke, weight issues, type 2 diabetes, and some cancers. And it can also increase mental well-being by reducing stress, depression, and anxiety. And the other thing we know is that using active modes like walking, cycling, or catching the bus to work are easy ways to be physically active. So rather than adding in physical activity to people's already busy lives, it can be integrated into their daily activities. So it becomes an easy thing. It's not an add-on. So what did we do about it? So firstly, we had to understand our employees and how they were travelling. We checked we had the right facilities and policies, and we've also quantified our carbon emissions and set some goals for the future. And of course, we're always watching to see if there are any changes that we need to make. So a travel survey is key to understanding your staff behaviour and barriers. We've been doing staff travel surveys for a number of years, and here are the results from our most recent survey. We actually have a dashboard where we can keep all this information now. We ask our staff to identify how they travel to work each day for a whole week, or if they worked at home or didn't work each day. This gives us a rich source of data to understand travel patterns rather than just one day's data. And you can see from the mode share pie chart on the right there that we travel quite sustainably. The blue slices are show that more than half our people travel by bike. So we're bike nuts, really. We're also able to monitor how much working from home is happening over time, and also this dashboard summarises our commuting emissions per employee. So back to basics, how can we support people to walk, jog, cycle and scoot? And it really is that broad these days. There are different types of bikes, there are e-scooters, and there are all sorts of different devices out there that people can use to travel actively. So we have a secure bicycle cage, it's covered, it's locked, and we have different rack options so we can store different types of bikes. What we've learned is you need to make the space flexible. When we built the bike cage 4 years ago, e-scooters weren't a thing. We give people high visibility bag covers, which is a good way of getting your brand out there. And as I mentioned before, we have some pool bikes as well that are also branded. In the office, we have changing rooms, we have a wardrobe for hanging clothes, we have personal lockers for storing gear, and we have a shower with fresh towels. So you don't need to bring your own towel, and then that avoids having the manky ones left in the shower room, as we'd found in our old office. We take part in the Aotearoa Bike Challenge each year, and we've provided free bike maintenance paid for by the company. There's a lot of useful information on the Wakakatahi Workplace Cycling Guide, and I've just put a link there, so afterwards if you want to have a look you can find out about that. And it covers encouraging people on bikes both for fleets and also for commuting. The other side of the coin is parking management, and I know this has been touched on briefly before, and the aim, I guess, ultimately is not to provide any on-site parking. But what we did when we moved into this office 5 years ago is we had a look at what was feasible. We had 8 spaces, but we didn't just let them be a free-for-all. We didn't allocate them to the CE and the head, the senior management either. What we did is we allocated it. We looked at the best use of how these spaces could be used. So we've got one as a visitor space. We've got one as a pool car space. We used one as an entry to the bike cage, which is located in an area that would otherwise be gathering rubbish. And then the remaining 5 are bookable spaces. So we've got an online system to book those spaces, and staff are allocated tokens to use in a 3-month period. So that means that if someone really needs to drive one day for whatever reason, then they can actually book a parking space on site. But it's not something that can happen every day because they would run out of tokens. And the system works really well. Another thing we had a look at was our policies. So one policy that we've got is called a guaranteed ride home policy, and that provides a safety net for all staff, irrespective of how they travel to work. It's essentially a low-cost insurance policy. What it says is that you can get a ride home and it can be paid by the company in an Uber or a taxi in case of an emergency or unexpected event. This just gives people a bit of confidence that if they bike to work and they have a sick child that they need to go and pick up, then they can go and do that. Or if they car share and their car share ride has to stay late for work, then they can still get home. We also have a wellness benefit that staff can use to support their active travel choices. So they can buy bike lights or running shoes. Some other points are to make sure your travel policy encourages the right vehicle for the job. So active modes for short trips, choose EV or hybrid hire cars, that sort of thing. And some organisations are going much further by giving interest-free loans for e-bike purchases or paying their staff to commute sustainably. We haven't quite got there yet. And through our work, we've identified that there was a gap in collecting data. I said before, we're data people. We found it difficult to collect, or it wasn't easy to collect data on how our employees commute. So we've recently launched a product called CarbonWise to help organisations measure employee commuting. And it involves an online survey that employees fill out about how they travel to work over a week. It gives them instant feedback on the carbon emissions they generate from commuting in a year. The organisation can see results on a dashboard, and that's what I showed you our dashboard before. And of course, measuring commuting means an employer can report on carbon emissions from these trips, and they can also then help their staff with better travel options. So for example, putting more or better cycle parking in, or giving people whatever it is that they think that they need. There's a video available on our website if you want to find out more about CarbonWise. So my call to action for you today is that we do need to do more than converting our current vehicles to different fuels. As has already been said, that's going to happen too slowly, and there's other costs associated with doing that. Active travel has numerous benefits for your staff and our communities, so I'd encourage you to really think about how these low carbon modes can become part of your company and employee travel choices. Kia ora koutou, that's me. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Anne-Marie. Really appreciate you sharing Abley's experience today as well. It's awesome, and yeah, thanks for stopping sharing your screen as well. So I'm just going to invite all of our speakers back. So we're all on webcam. That's brilliant, and we'll go straight into the Q&A parts of this. So if you've still got any further questions for speakers, feel free to put those in to the chat or the Q&A. I'm sure you'll all appreciate this is a really interesting topic, and it's also there's a huge amount to it. So we've only been able to touch on a few things in this hour slot. We could easily do a full day on sustainability topic, if not longer. So appreciate we haven't managed to cover absolutely everything, but if you have got a burning question either relating to what's been said or something that hasn't been covered but you're really interested in that sustainability piece, then please email that through. Put it in the chat or the Q&A. But I have also had one question through regarding the presentations as well as the recording. We will share PDF versions of the presentation slides with you all too following this session. So if there's particular pieces of information or data that you wanted to use, they'll be through as PDF following this as well. So we've had a few questions through already, and Kirsten, I appreciate that you have answered this one on the chat as well, but if I can repeat it and we can say it verbally just for the recording too, so that people looking at the recording have also got it. Euclid, thanks for being on this call. He asked how are smart chargers becoming more accessible for everyday users in terms of costs and infrastructure, or is this more a case of changing mobility in your view, Kirsten?
That's I'm pleased to be able to answer it verbally because I was a bit concise on the chat. So smart chargers have got a really critical part to play for the country. ECA is certainly looking at it at the moment, and so is central government. We need to see some policy changes. If you compare us to, say, Norway, where they have a right to charge policy. So if you're a landlord, you can't block one of your tenants installing a smart charger. And they also have legislation in place around new residential and commercial builds having to install not the actual charger, but the wiring and the switchboard capacity for chargers. So we need to see some policy changes there. Smart charging is going to be critical as the EV population grows. When you think we've got less than 2% EV in this country, and we've already seen issues with power. So smart chargers, please don't anyone on this call install anything but a smart charger. But adding to charging infrastructure, also think about there's three aspects that you need to look at. The home chargers, 96% of charging infrastructure in New Zealand is done at home, and WorkSafe, with Drive Electric Board have certainly been lobbying hard, and WorkSafe have indicated that they're going to make it more accessible and easier and change their WorkSafe addendum to allow smart chargers to be installed outside of a garage. So that's a positive thing that's going to happen next year. But you need home chargers, work chargers, and smart chargers, public chargers, and having those three options. One might work or two might work for your business. It depends on your business and your requirements. But don't think, oh, I only need work chargers or I only need home chargers. It's the combination of those three, public, home, and work chargers, that are really important. Happy to answer any other charging questions offline. Caroline can share my details.
Great, thanks for that, Kirsten. Anyone else, Louise or Anne-Marie, want to add anything, or are we good with one? Excellent, thanks for that, Kirsten. That's a really comprehensive response on there. Well, I can see, I'll just ask this one, although it's only just come in, but just because it is also relating to charging, and a follow-up question. Can the wiring of these buildings cope with smart charging and load balancing?
For the majority of builds, there isn't switchboard capacity, and so that adds an additional cost when you're installing chargers. So that is a real challenge. In some cities, we also don't have enough transformer capacity. So hence why smart chargers are really, really important. And I just also encourage you to think about, at the moment, we seem to have this mentality in New Zealand Every business is trying to install their own charging infrastructure, but it's a bit like our car parks, and it's like our cars as well. We have to look at how can we share that technology so we're not all overcapitalizing, because at the moment we can certainly see a whole lot of businesses overcapitalizing. So how can you share your charging infrastructure with other businesses in your building? You don't all have to go to the cost of installing charging infrastructure. That's something I'd get you to I'd ask you to consider, because that's that whole financial sustainability and smarter use of your capital, not investing it into depreciating assets.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kirsten. Really useful. Hamish asked for any speaker, and I appreciate after this we did hear from Anne-Marie following this too around Abley, but also for any speaker, any plans to optimise further and have a mix of cars and e-bikes available, or other mobility options available to help with mode shift, safety, climate change and congestion. So obviously you heard about all of the stuff that Abley is doing, Anne-Marie, but Kirsten, Louise, do you want to add anything to those? Louise?
Yeah. I think it's vital that we enable the adoption of all active transport. People are going to need different things based on their need of that moment. So how do we ensure not only do we have access to that affordably, but really importantly, what's the infrastructure required for it to be safe? Biking, as we've all seen, and I'm from Wellington, you can imagine some of the conversations that I get myself stuck into when people complain about removing parking to put in bike lanes. We've got to be able to plan now for the future that we want, and that means asking the right questions of our councillors and our MPs, and really importantly voting for them. So let's make sure that we understand from a business standpoint how can we support that, but really importantly from an individual standpoint, because we all want to be safe, and we should be able to choose the right transport solution for us in that moment and get home. And at the moment, that's not necessarily the case in large cities. So, it's a really, really important thing we've all got to contribute to.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Kirsten, do you want to add any extra from your point of view?
No, I completely agree. I loved Anne-Marie's presentation too, and the work that they've done. I just think it's incredible and just so important. I think, we have to look at that technology play and how can we make it easy for people to have that interoperability between different modes of transport. So I think that's an opportunity for all of us to work on, to be honest.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Kirsten. Now I've had a couple more questions come through. I appreciate the time. We are dead on 3 o'clock, but if speakers are all still okay for a couple more minutes, then we will just finish off with a couple of extra questions. I can see that Bill has got his hand up, and I'm not sure whether that was because he can't put a question through. So I'm just going to allow your mic, Bill. So if you have got a question that you wanted to ask, you can feel free to unmute yourself and ask it, or if not, then I'll carry on with a different question.
Yeah, no question, carry on. Great presentation, guys. Really, really good. So thank you. So move on, Caroline. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. Okay, great. So yeah, I've just had a couple more questions through, and I'm just checking the Q&A as well. So yeah, question that's come through on the Q&A, which is for you, Louise, around why it's taking quite a bit of time for Toyota to shift from hybrids to EVs. Is there why is it taking quite some time to go from the hybrids to the transition to EVs, and not just here but globally? This says as well. It's a global
I think a lot of that is when you are innovative like Toyota was 20 years ago with the hybrid. You've stuck to that. So yeah, definitely. There's no doubt that Toyota was behind the 8 ball when it came to the application of battery electric, because there was so much investment made in hybrid. Also, if you think about it, the Japanese market. really doesn't, it's not built for EVs. There's no, in big cities, there's no ability to charge, there's no parking, etc. So hybrid was actually the best low emission option for that population. So that's meant that, yes, absolutely behind some of the larger competitors. But what I've learned from my time at Toyota is when the ship moves, it moves at pace. So we're pretty excited by the products that are going to come to market. But the biggest challenge, as everybody knows, is supply. We've got massive supply constraints globally, and within Toyota, absolutely the same. So yes, we would love to have ships of the Toyota Beyond Zero EV, which is due to come into the market in the next 12 months. We'd love to have ships of it arriving here ASAP, but it's pretty hard when you're competing for very, very large markets with huge demand to get them to send ships down to the bottom of the earth. So yeah, we're doing our best we can. But at the moment, we know that the hybrid, the transformation towards hybrid across the entire fleet is absolutely a priority. We've got some challenges here in New Zealand, as Kirsten mentioned, around the types of vehicles that particularly our economy needs to deliver, and particularly in the ag space. So we're doing all we can to get those low emission vehicles into, and whether it's the Hilux, whether it's the High Ace, whatever it might be, so watch this space.
Yeah, thanks, Louise.
And just to add in to what Louise has said, hybrid still has a really important role to play, where we don't have a four-wheel drive or cost-effective EV in that market. So if you can move from petrol into hybrid, or if it's right, go into EV, but fit for purpose, you've got to look at what's right for your fleet.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. And one just a follow-up for you, Louise, too, around is there somewhere people can go to learn more about what Toyota's doing regarding the battery end of life and refurb planning?
Yeah, thanks, Greg, for that question. Yeah, absolutely. Look out in November when I release the sustainability report. It'll all be in there, but happy also to connect directly. We're wanting to be really transparent and open about what we're working on. We're working really closely with government and the Ministry of the Environment and the Battery Innovation Hub to be able to test and share what we're finding. Our situation is very different from some of the other battery electric manufacturers, where our current challenge is nickel metal hydride, not lithium. So that means we have to find solutions today rather than some of those other car manufacturers that are looking 10 to 15 years out when those batteries start to end their life. So a different challenge, but a challenge that we are embracing. So more than happy to connect directly, or happy to share more information publicly in November.
Brilliant. Thanks, Louise. And final question, and thanks everyone for the comments about the webinar and the information that you've got from this. Glad you've all found it useful. That's brilliant. The final question for all of you, I'll come to you, Anne-Marie, first, is what should we consider for policy, or what do we need to consider for policies in relation to sustainable and active travel, but particularly thinking from a health and safety perspective as well? Are there any extra things that we need to consider when putting in place more active travel and sustainable measures? For example, providing staff with access to e-bikes, e-scooters, things like that. So Anne-Marie, if I come to you first.
Sure. So there has been some talk, and I know some organisations have been quite reticent to allow their staff to use bikes or e-bikes, especially for company travel. And we went through the same sort of process. But essentially, it's the same as any other health and safety risk. You identify the risks and then you try and mitigate or avoid them as far as you can. So it's a matter of making sure that that your staff have the right equipment. They have the helmets, they have the bikes set up correctly, they know how to ride that sort of bike. Maybe they have some training beforehand and they do the usual bike checks before they use those bikes, or e-scooters if it was that. So yes, there is some health and safety, I guess, policy that needs to be covered off, but it shouldn't be seen as a barrier to not using those modes.
Great, thanks, Anne-Marie. Anything to add, Kirsten or Louise, both from a active travel perspective, but also in relation to implementing EVs or the charging infrastructure or the infrastructure around it as well in relation to policies?
Yeah, I'll just quickly go into. I'm the first person at Toyota to obviously have to, walk the talk to get an EV charger put in my home. So that's testing a policy. That's accepting that it's not always going to be perfect. That my house is going to look very different to my colleague's house. What's the process to support people? Really make it individual. Whether it's EVs, plug-in hybrids, bikes, whatever it might be. Understand the challenges and the opportunities at the individual level. People come with lots of interesting challenges in their own lives. So think about that. They might not have somewhere to park. They might be on pay-as-you-go electricity. They might be on. They might not, necessarily feel safe, going on a bike for whatever reason. What's the support that you can give them in order for them to transition? Because the most important thing that'll get us to net zero carbon is everybody changing their behaviour. We can have as much technology as we like, but unless people change their behaviour, it's never, ever going to be implemented.
Yeah, great.
I can just probably add to that, just on a more of a micro level. When Zilch works with their customers, and there's no reason why, you can't do this as well, we have in-car guides, we have guides that go on the internet. We work with our customers to develop a training video which covers off, what you do when you get in the vehicle to adjust your seating. Around that charger space, we obviously install chargers for work and for home and integrate with public charging as well. And just making, Zilch takes the responsibility for the annual certifications of those products to make sure that they've done. So it's something, if you are installing chargers, you do need to be cognizant of that. It's electrical equipment, and also ensuring, as Anne-Marie said, that you've got safe charging infrastructure for your e-bikes and your e-scooters as well is really critical. So just looking at those different elements and making sure you've got processes in place that those safety aspects are covered off.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks very much, Kirsten. It's great, and thanks all three of you for joining in with the Q&A session, and thanks everybody who put forward questions as well. And it was great to have all those different questions through. So brilliant to have you all as part of it. We'll just wrap up very, very quickly, Liz. So before we head off, just to let you know, our calendar of webinars and roundtables is online on the Global Fleet Champions website. We have still got a couple left for the rest of this year, a roundtable on using data effectively in September, and followed by a webinar on the same topic in November as well. More details are available on the Global Fleet Champions website for those. We'll also be celebrating the winners of the 2022 Australasian Fleet Champions Awards in October, and we hope to have an in-person event in Auckland. That is the plan, so fingers crossed for that one. You can find out full details of the awards and the ceremony online on the Global Fleet Champions site as well. And thank you again for being part of the webinar today and Global Fleet Champions. We are a charity, and as such we rely on donations, fundraisers and corporate supporters to help us continue our work to share best practice in road risk management and fleet safety, to provide events and resources, and also continue our wider work to prevent road deaths and injuries, make communities safer and provide free support to people who've been affected by road crashes. So if you are able to help us in some way, it's greatly appreciated. You can buy a good gift card or an entertainment membership, become a partner, make an individual donation or run a fundraiser, and there's more information on all of those on our website. And if you'd like to discuss working with us more, please feel free to contact me or tick the relevant box on the feedback survey as well. So I hope you found today's webinar useful and interesting. As I said, we'll send out the feedback survey link post-webinar along with copies of the presentations. Please do complete the survey. It's really useful in helping us to plan future events. And thank you again to all of our speakers today and to you for taking part. And we hope to see you at another event again soon. Thanks all.